There are two kinds of people who use the word formality. There are people who mean it, people who hand you a piece of paper because the paper genuinely means nothing, because you are all on the same side, and this is administrative housekeeping, and they would be just as happy if you shredded it after. And then there are people who use the word the way you use a door that only swings one direction. They say it lightly. They say it while they are still pouring coffee, or while their hand is already moving toward the bread basket, so there is no visual weight on it. They say it like the word itself should settle the matter, like the word formality is a kind of sedative and they're waiting for it to take effect. I had heard Cristina use that word before. I had sat at this same kitchen table 4 years earlier and watched her slide a document toward my mother, a simple authorization. She had said, just a formality. That moved my mother's car insurance into the family account in a way that saved Owen and Cristina approximately $93 a month, while my mother quietly absorbed the administrative inconvenience. I had watched my mother pick up the pen and nod. I had told myself then, at 34, sitting in that chair with my coat still on because I had just arrived, that I would not be my mother in that moment. That if the pen ever slid toward me, I would read the paper first. I was 38 this Sunday. She finally slid one my way. My name is Nadia Fontaine, and I am 38 years old, and the afternoon my sister-in-law set a property transfer document in front of me on my mother's kitchen table and told me it was just a formality. I was still wearing my work badge from Eastbrook Rehabilitation Clinic, and I had been on my feet since 5:15 that morning. I had driven 40 minutes to get to this dinner. I had brought a pan of roasted sweet potatoes and a bottle of wine my coworker Priya had recommended. A Malbec she said was good enough for a holiday, but not so good that anyone would feel strange drinking it on a Sunday. I had been looking forward to sitting down. Instead, I was standing at the kitchen counter with a document in my hands, reading it once and then again, while Cristina stood across from me with her coffee and the expression of someone who has already decided the outcome of a conversation and is simply waiting for the other person to arrive at it. The house on Alderman Street in Raleigh was mine. I want to say that plainly at the beginning so that nothing that follows feels ambiguous about the central fact. My grandmother Irene had left it to me specifically, by name, in language that her attorney had made unambiguous, when I was 31 years old and she was 84 and had been declining for 2 years in the particular way that some women decline, quietly, with full awareness, having already decided what she wanted to say and to whom. She had not left it to the family. She had not left it jointly. She had left it to me, and she had left it that way because she had watched me for 31 years and made a decision about what she saw. Since the day I inherited it, I had paid the mortgage every month without exception. $1,247 on the 4th of every month, 42 consecutive transfers, not one of them late. I had paid the homeowner's insurance, $612 annually, renewed each October. I had paid the property taxes, $2,318 the previous year, a slight increase from the year before. When the roof developed a slow leak 2 winters ago, I had paid a contractor named Dennis Okafor $4,287 to reseal it over 3 days in February while I stayed with Priya and her husband and slept on their pull-out sofa. I had done all of this alone, on an occupational therapist's salary, without asking anyone in my family for help or acknowledgement or even awareness. None of that is a complaint. I am telling you because it matters to the story. I am telling you because the document Cristina said in front of me that Sunday was a document that would have moved this house, this mortgage, these taxes, this repaired roof, into an LLC she and Owen had formed 8 months earlier without telling me, under the name Fontaine Family Holdings, LLC. And I am telling you because the word formality is a very specific kind of lie. It is not the kind of lie that invents something false. It is the kind of lie that takes something true and removes its weight, so that when you react to the weight you are the one who seems unreasonable. Owen and I grew up 11 months apart in a house in Cary, North Carolina, where my mother Renata made coffee at 6 every morning and stood at the window above the sink for exactly as long as it took to finish it, looking out at the backyard like she was waiting for something to declare itself. She is a gentle woman, my mother. Not weak. There is a difference, and I have had to learn it more than once. She is gentle the way some materials are gentle, absorbing pressure rather than deflecting it, which means she has a very high threshold for discomfort and a very low instinct to name what is causing it. She believed, and I think still believes, that families that stay at the table long enough will eventually find their way to something workable. This is not always wrong. It is just not always right. Cristina came into our family 9 years ago when Owen was 31 and had been living in Raleigh for 4 years working in commercial insurance. She was organized and energetic and had strong opinions about financial planning delivered in the tone of someone who finds it baffling that not everyone has thought as carefully about these things as she has. She had grown up in a family that had lost a house when she was 12. Her father's landscaping business had collapsed after a bad contract year, and the family had spent 11 months in her aunt's spare bedroom in Greensboro before getting back on their feet. I know this because Cristina told me this once, early in her relationship with Owen, over a glass of wine at a restaurant on Glenwood Avenue. She told it factually, without visible emotion, the way people tell old stories they have processed so thoroughly they have become case studies. She said, "You learn young either that security is something that happens to you or something you build." I learned early which one I was going to do. I believed her. I still believe her. What I understand now that I only half understood then is that the security Cristina built was not contained to the edges of what was hers. She built it by arrangement, by paperwork, by the gradual consolidation of things she could fold into the structure she was constructing. She was not malicious. I have thought about this a great deal, and I do not think she woke up on the morning she had that LLC document prepared and thought about theft. I think she looked at the Alderman Street house the way she looked at everything, as a variable in a system, and variables in systems should be accounted for. Her fear had become a methodology, and her methodology had started to extend past the property line of what belonged to her. That is not an excuse. It is an explanation. I have found it useful to know the difference. The document she set in front of me transferred the Alderman Street property into Fontaine Family Holdings, LLC. The LLC had 2 managing members. Neither of them was me. I read this twice, the way you read something when you want to make sure you are reading what you think you are reading. Then I looked up. She said, "It's just a formality. You sign here, and it protects everyone." I said, "What does it protect everyone from?" "Liability," she said. She was already reaching for her coffee again, which I noted. If anything ever happened at the property, a slip and fall, a contractor dispute, anything, the LLC insulates the family from personal liability. It's standard. A lot of people do it. Owen was at the far end of the table. He was looking at the wooden cutting board in the center of the table where my mother had set the bread.
He was not looking at me.
My mother said, "It sounds like good sense, Nadia." I set the document flat on the table. I looked at it for a moment. I said, "I want to think about it." Cristina said, "Of course, take your time," in a tone that understood my thinking time to be a formality of its own, a brief delay before agreement. I folded the document once along its center crease, slid it into the outer pocket of my bag between my parking receipt and my clinic ID lanyard, and I helped my mother carry dishes to the table, and I ate dinner, and I said nothing else about it. On the drive home, on I-40 heading east with the last of the evening light going orange in my rearview mirror, I understood 2 things at the same time. The first was that I was not going to sign that document. The second was that I needed to understand exactly why before I did anything else. I keep a handwritten ledger in my kitchen drawer. Not for money, I have a spreadsheet for that, but for decisions. It is a small green notebook with graph paper pages that I bought at a drugstore 8 years ago and have been using ever since, writing down decisions I am trying to think through, the way some people talk out loud to process, and I tend to go silent. I wrote Alderman St/LLC/Fontaine Family Holdings at the top of a new page that night with a copper kettle heating on the stove and the document unfolded on the table in front of me. I read it a 3rd time. I read it a 4th. What the document said, stripped of the vocabulary of protection and sensibility and family, was this: Nadia Fontaine transfers her property into an entity she does not control. That was the sentence under all the other sentences. I wrote it in the notebook. Then I opened my laptop and I searched for real estate attorneys in Raleigh who handled title matters and property transfers, and I wrote down 3 names with phone numbers. Then I closed the laptop and made my tea and went to bed, and I slept better than I had slept in several weeks. Some things clarify themselves the moment you stop asking other people what to think about them. I called Len Vasquez the following Monday morning at 8:47, standing in the parking lot of Eastbrook Rehabilitation Clinic while the morning was still cool and the sky was that particular pale blue that early November makes over the flat part of North Carolina. Len had been recommended by Priya, who had used him 2 years earlier when her landlord attempted to attach her name to a secondary lease without her consent. Priya had described him in 3 words: precise, fast, unbothered. These were exactly the qualities I needed. I gave him the situation in 4 minutes. He asked 3 questions. Was the deed currently in my name alone? Had I signed anything? Was there any existing lien or encumbrance on the property that I was aware of? I answered yes, no, and not to my knowledge. He said, if the deed is in your name and you haven't signed anything, they haven't done anything yet that can't be addressed. Come in Thursday. I went in Thursday. I brought the unsigned LLC transfer document, the original deed my grandmother's attorney had transferred to me 7 years earlier, a folder of 42 consecutive mortgage statements, and the insurance renewal documents from the last 2 years. Len looked at the folder.
He looked at me.
He said, "You've been carrying this alone?" "Since the day it became mine," I said. He nodded once, without ceremony. He said, "What would you like to do?" I told him I wanted the title reviewed for any existing encumbrances or unauthorized filings. I wanted a clear title certification on record, and I wanted a formal ownership affidavit filed with the county that would require any future transfer attempt to come with my in-person, notarized signature and a 30-day advance notice sent to my address of record. He said he would begin that afternoon. I drove to work. I had 3 patients that morning, 2 post-surgical recoveries and 1 stroke patient. A retired schoolteacher named Bernard, who had been working for 6 weeks on the fine motor coordination in his right hand. That Thursday, we worked on buttons. Specifically, the 3 small ones at the cuff of a flannel shirt he had brought in from home because he wanted to be able to put it on without his wife's help before Thanksgiving. We sat at the work table, and we worked through it slowly. And by the end of the session, he had managed the top cuff button twice in a row, and the expression on his face was one of the most uncomplicated things I have seen in my professional life. Pure, unguarded, the expression of a person recovering something he had been told might be gone. I drove home that evening thinking about that expression. I have found, in the years I have been doing this work, that watching someone reclaim a thing that was taken from them is never a small moment. It does not matter if the thing is a button or a house. The moment of reclamation has the same specific gravity. The title certification process took 23 days. Len called me 4 times with updates. The title was clean, no unauthorized filings, no encumbrances, everything consistent with the original transfer from my grandmother's estate. Each call was quiet and factual and lasted under 10 minutes. Each time I hung up, I sat for a moment with a feeling that had been following me since the Sunday at my mother's table. Not triumph, not relief, but something older and heavier. The feeling of realizing how long a window has been open that you did not know was open. The feeling of understanding that someone had been measuring what you had, deciding what they could reach, and you had been going about your life without knowing you were being measured. The vulnerability of that is real. I want to say that plainly. It is one thing to discover that a person tried to take something from you. It is another to sit with the question of how long the attempt had been forming and what it says about what you allowed to go unnamed. The worst of it came on a Tuesday night, 11 days into the process. I know it was Tuesday because I had worked a 12-hour shift, 2 patients had run long, there had been a scheduling problem with the afternoon transport van, and I had stayed until 7:30 to help sort out coverage for the next morning. I came home and I showered and I meant to eat something, and somehow I was sitting on the bathroom floor at 11:14 p.m. I had gone in to wash my face, and my legs had made a decision my brain had not consulted. The tile was cold through my pajamas. The light overhead was the harsh flat white of a light that is simply on, not atmospheric, not forgiving, just present. I had 3 missed calls from Owen on my phone. Not 3 new ones, 3 total, spread across 11 days, which meant he had called once and then twice more this week, and I had answered none of them. I sat there, and I thought about my grandmother Irene. I thought about a visit she made when I was 22, The fall of my last year of graduate school, when she drove up from Fayetteville by herself and took me to lunch at a diner near my apartment that had vinyl booths and photographs of downtown Raleigh from the 1960s on the walls. She had ordered pie she did not finish, and she had looked at me across the table and said, completely without introduction, "You know how to stand in a room without disappearing. Not everyone in this family can do that." I had been embarrassed. I had said something deflecting, something like, "I don't know about that." She had looked at me the way she sometimes looked at things she had already decided about. She had not repeated herself. Sitting on that bathroom floor at 11:14 p.m., I thought, this is the room she meant. This is exactly the room she was talking about. I got up. I washed my face. I looked at myself in the mirror for long enough that it became deliberate rather than accidental. Then I went to bed. In the morning, I called Len and told him I was ready to file the affidavit whenever the certification was complete. The filing happened on a Wednesday morning at the Wake County Register of Deeds office, which is in a building downtown with fluorescent lighting and a row of plastic chairs along one wall, and a counter behind which two clerks process documents with the efficient boredom of people who understand that the papers they handle mean everything to the people handing them over and nothing to the cabinet they will be filed in. I stood at the counter. I handed over the documents. The clerk stamped them. She gave me copies in a manila envelope. I said thank you. She said have a good day. I walked out into a November morning that had gone cold and bright, and I sat in my car in the parking garage for 6 minutes before I drove away. Day 31 was a Thursday. I was eating lunch at my desk, turkey on wheat, the kind of lunch you eat when you are not thinking about lunch, when my phone rang.
Owen.
I let it go to voicemail. It rang again 40 seconds later. I let it go. The third time I picked up, he said, "Did you do something with the house?" I confirmed my ownership of the house. I said, "Yes." A silence that had texture to it. I could hear him breathing, which meant he was standing somewhere in his house rather than sitting, which meant this was not a casual call. "Cristina got a notification from the county," he said, "about a filing on the property." "There is a filing on the property," I said. "I made it. It confirms that I am the sole owner and that any proposed transfer requires my in-person, notarized signature with 30 days advance notice." Another silence. Then, "You could have just talked to us. You could have said you didn't want to do it." I said I wanted to think about it. I said, "That was me talking to you." What I found when I thought about it was that the document she gave me would have put my house inside an LLC with 2 managing members, neither of whom was me. I don't want to have the conversation about intentions. What I want is for you to know that the house is in my name, and it is going to stay there.
"She's upset," he said.
"I understand that," I said. He hung up. I ate the rest of my lunch. I was due in the therapy room in 11 minutes for Bernard's appointment, and we were working on shoelaces that week, which required my full attention. Cristina called at 4:32 that afternoon. I did not answer. She called at 5:07. I did not answer. By 9 o'clock that evening, she had called 11 times in total. I know this because I counted them before I turned the phone face down on the kitchen counter next to the Earl Grey tea tin with a dent in the lid that I had owned since I was 26 and had never once considered replacing. The text from Owen came at 9:23 p.m. "Cristina is saying you're trying to cut the family out of something that was always meant to be shared. She's really hurt." I read it. I put the phone back down. I made tea. I sat at my kitchen table in the same chair where I had read the LLC document a month earlier, and I thought about what it means to say that something was always meant to be shared. Meant by whom? On whose authority? In whose version of events? I have learned over 38 years that there is a particular kind of person who can look at a document with your name on it and hear the word family and conclude that the two things are in fundamental conflict. That the document is the problem. That the name belongs to everyone. That choosing to retain what is yours is a form of selfishness, so obvious it barely needs articulation. I do not think Cristina was lying in that text. I think she had constructed a version of events in which her reach was protection, and my refusal was cruelty, and in that version, everything was consistent. That is the most difficult kind of wrong to address. Not the calculated kind. The sincere kind. My mother called Friday morning while I was getting ready for work. She said she had heard there was some trouble. I told her there had been a document, and the trouble had been in the document before I ever read it. She said Cristina was saying. I said Mom gently, and she stopped. I told her the same thing I had told Owen. The house was mine. I had confirmed it. I had not asked anyone for anything, and I did not intend to. My mother was quiet for a moment, and then she said she just thought if everyone sat down together. I told her this was me sitting down together, right now, with her. She did not have an answer for that. We ended the call the way my mother and I always end calls, which is kindly, without resolution but without wound either, and I drove to work. The family dinner was 3 weeks later, the last Sunday of the month. My mother had called it without ceremony, the way she always calls them, and I went because I had made a decision somewhere between the bathroom floor and the county filing office that I was not going to absent myself from my own family to manage Cristina's discomfort. Absence would have looked like guilt or like cowardice, and I was neither guilty nor afraid. I brought a green salad with the lemon dressing my mother likes, and I arrived at 6:15, and I hung up my navy wool coat on the hook by the back door the way I always do. There were 7 people at the table. My mother, Owen, Cristina, a college friend of Owen's named Danny who was passing through town with his girlfriend Alexis, and my mother's neighbor Elaine, who appears at approximately 30% of family dinners and who has, over the years, developed a talent for conversational neutrality that I have come to genuinely admire. We ate roast chicken and green beans and a potato dish my mother makes with rosemary and good butter. Danny talked about a road trip he and Alexis had taken along the Blue Ridge. Elaine asked about my work, and I told her about Bernard and the shirt buttons, and she said that sounded like meaningful work, and I said it was. Cristina did not look at me directly for the first 40 minutes of the meal. She passed dishes in my direction without making eye contact, which requires a specific kind of effort at a table that seats 7. Owen was attentive in the careful way of someone who has been asked to manage a situation he does not entirely understand. I ate my food. I participated in the conversation. I was neither warm nor cold toward Cristina. I was ordinary. It cost me almost nothing. Near the end of the meal, while my mother was in the kitchen and Danny was telling Alexis something about the dessert, Cristina looked at me directly for the first time that evening. She said, I hope you know I wasn't trying to take anything from you. I looked at her. I said, I know you weren't trying to. She blinked. I think she had been prepared for something else, a concession, an apology, or an argument she could push against. What she got was a plain sentence and nothing attached to it. She said, it was genuinely meant to help, to protect the asset. I understand that's what it was meant to do, I said. The house is mine, though, so I needed to make sure it stayed that way. Danny said something to Alexis about whether there was ice cream. My mother came back with a pie she had made from canned peaches. Elaine complimented the crust. The conversation moved. I had a second cup of coffee. I drove home at 9:15 on a quiet highway with all 4 windows cracked because the night had gone mild for November, the kind of mild that feels like a gift from weather that knows it is about to end. Owen called the following Wednesday. It was not an argument call. He said he thought he should have asked me before she had the document prepared. I said yes, I thought so too. He said he hadn't known what she was going to do, not specifically. I told him I believed that, mostly, which was true. We talked for 22 minutes, and at some point we ended up talking about our grandmother the way we had not in a long time, about how she used to stand at the kitchen window in the mornings, and about the smell of the house on Alderman Street in summer, when the windows were all open. Owen remembered that she kept a tin of hard candies on the windowsill. I had forgotten that. I was glad he remembered it. I told him the house was still on Alderman Street and I still had 2 spare keys, and one of them had his name on the hook by my front door if he ever wanted it. He said he would call more.
I said I would like that.
I meant it. I had been seeing Dr. Harlow since January of that year, a therapist whose office is 6 blocks from the clinic and who has kept a rubber plant alive in the corner for 11 years, which I find genuinely remarkable. I had started going because I was not sleeping well and because Priya had said, one afternoon over lunch, with the particular gentleness she reserves for things she has been wanting to say for a while, I think you're carrying a lot of things that don't have to be yours. In our session the week after the family dinner, Dr. Harlow asked me what I thought had changed. I thought about it for a moment. I said, I think I stopped waiting for someone else to see the house the way Grandma Irene saw it. I just saw it that way myself. She wrote something down. She said, "And what does that feel like?" I said, "Quiet. It feels quiet." There is a particular kind of morning that the Alderman Street house makes in late autumn. The sun comes through the kitchen window at an angle that hits the copper kettle first and turns it briefly to something that looks almost like fire, and then the angle shifts, and it is just a kettle again, and the whole street outside is still and ordinary. I make my tea in that kitchen on the mornings I am there, and I stand at the window the way my grandmother used to, and I do not feel the need to decide what I am looking at. I just look. Family, without respect, becomes entitlement. I have lived long enough to know this is true. And entitlement grows teeth the moment you build something it cannot control. Forgiveness is not access. Understanding is not reunion. Compassion is not a key to a door you have decided to hold closed. I can believe that Cristina acted from fear, from an old wound that learned to walk and call itself practicality, and I can also know, without contradiction, that her fear was not mine to house. Roles can be recast. The first person who needs to know you are done shrinking is you. I signed nothing. I filed one form. I stood at a county clerk's counter on a Wednesday morning with a manila envelope, and I let the ordinary machinery of the world do what ordinary machinery does when you give it the right paperwork. There was no speech. There was no confrontation at the kitchen table where I announced what I had done. There was just a morning and a clerk and a stamp, and then I walked out into the cold, bright air, and I was still exactly who I had been when I walked in. Some people only know how to love what they can control. And the most useful thing you can do for yourself, and sometimes, eventually, even for them, is to become something they realize they cannot. I think about my grandmother standing at that window. I think about what she said to me when I was 22 and had not yet learned how to hold still in a room without apologizing for the space I occupied. I think she knew something that she wanted to leave me along with the house, something that takes longer than a will to transfer. If someone has ever set a paper in front of you and called it a formality, and something in you went careful before you reached for the pen, I want to ask you, what did that moment tell you about how much space you had been taking up? And what would it feel like to take up exactly the right amount?